The first time Karen knocked on my door, it wasn't really a knock. It was more like an angry hammering, the kind that says, "I'm not here for pleasantries." I had just sat down with a cup of coffee, still surrounded by unopened boxes, and a half-assembled bookshelf when the banging started. At first, I thought it might be a delivery person, or maybe even a neighbor welcoming me to the community. No such luck. I opened the door to find a woman in her late 50s, wearing a windbreaker with the neighborhood HOA logo embroidered on the chest like a badge of honor. She had tightly pinned hair, a clipboard in one hand, and the kind of squint that made you feel guilty even if you hadn't done anything wrong. Before I could say hello, she pointed, dramatically, toward the street. "That mailbox," she said, drawing out the last syllable like it personally offended her. "It's not regulation." I blinked. "Excuse me? The mailbox. It's not approved by the HOA. Black metal? That style isn't part of the neighborhood standard. We only allow white, colonial-style boxes mounted on cedar posts." She flipped her clipboard to a page covered in highlighted paragraphs. Page 12 of the guidelines. Now, I'm generally a calm person, especially when I'm still running on caffeine and optimism. But this woman had stormed onto my property within days of my move-in, pointed at something entirely harmless, and was now telling me to take it down like I'd erected a statue of myself in the front yard. I glanced at the mailbox. It was sleek, modern, and frankly, a lot nicer than the crooked, rust-stained relics most of my neighbors still used. It hadn't been cheap either. Professionally installed, secured in concrete, and more importantly, approved by the builder. I had the paperwork somewhere in the filing cabinet I hadn't even unpacked yet. "I just moved in last week," I said, choosing my words carefully. "This mailbox was installed by the same contractor who built the house. It's not something I changed or customized." Karen didn't budge. She flipped another page on her clipboard like she was preparing a courtroom argument. "Regardless of who installed it, it's the homeowner's responsibility to comply with HOA regulations. If you don't remove or replace it within 3 days, I'll be submitting a formal complaint, and the board will initiate proceedings to issue a citation. Further noncompliance could result in fines or even eviction, depending on the severity of the infraction." Eviction? Over a mailbox? At this point, I was still trying to wrap my head around the level of hostility coming from someone I hadn't even met until 60 seconds ago. She was standing there, acting as if my mailbox had personally insulted her family. I noticed she wasn't carrying anything resembling a welcome basket, or even the usual awkward neighborly smile. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't about community standards or aesthetics. This was about control. Karen had decided, for whatever reason, that I was going to be her new project. "I'll look into it," I said, nodding slightly, more to end the confrontation than anything else. Karen narrowed her eyes, like she suspected I was lying. "Good. 3 days. I'll be back." And with that, she pivoted on her heel and marched down my driveway like a soldier returning from battle. I closed the door slowly, still stunned. I glanced around at the boxes littering the living room, the half-assembled bookshelf, the moving chaos that still surrounded me. I hadn't even learned the trash pickup schedule yet, and I was already being threatened with a formal violation from the HOA. The nerve of her. Now here's the thing. I may be new to the neighborhood, but I'm not new to HOA politics. I'd dealt with similar types before. People who saw the bylaws not as guidelines for community living, but as tools of personal authority. They memorized rule books like scripture, handed out citations like candy, and acted like the neighborhood was their personal fiefdom. But what Karen didn't know was that I'm not the kind of person who backs down when something smells off. Walked over to the stack of files I'd brought from the closing meeting. Amid the mess, I found the manila folder labeled HOA Builder Docs. Flipping it open, I found the gem I was looking for. A printed email from the HOA president, dated 2 months prior, explicitly approving the mailbox design. It even included a photo of the exact model, the same black metal post with the brushed silver accents. The email was polite, official, and crystal clear. This design has been reviewed and approved for Lot 47 as an acceptable alternative to the default mailbox. Style. Please retain this approval for your records. I smiled. Karen had come to my door assuming she'd bulldoze me with her rules and her clipboard. What she didn't count on was that I had already done my homework. She probably got away with this kind of thing with people who didn't want the hassle, who'd rather cave and repaint their mailbox than argue. But me? I kept receipts. I carefully tucked the approval letter back into the folder and set it on my kitchen counter. I wasn't going to rush to confront her with it. No, I wanted to see just how far she'd take it. Let her file her complaint. Let her march back in 3 days full of self-righteous fury. Because when she came storming back with her threats and her attitude, I'd be ready. With more than just a polite smile. I'd have proof. And something told me this wasn't going to end the way Karen thought it would. The thing about people like Karen is, they count on you not pushing back. They count on their bravado and relentless confidence to be enough to make you fold. But I wasn't raised to be steamrolled, especially not by someone who thought a clipboard gave them power over other people's lives. After she left my porch, still fuming about the color and style of my mailbox, I spent the next hour calmly organizing my documents. The letter from the HOA president, signed, dated, and detailed, went into a new plastic sleeve. I made 2 copies. One was scanned and saved to my computer. The other went into my fireproof safe, right next to the deed and insurance documents. I wasn't just ready, I was prepared. Day 1 passed, and I didn't hear from her. But that didn't mean she wasn't watching. Every time I looked out my front window, there she was, strolling casually down the sidewalk in front of my house, sunglasses on, phone in hand, occasionally snapping what she thought were inconspicuous photos of my mailbox. Once I caught her standing perfectly still on the opposite curb, just staring at it for a solid 30 seconds, like it was a work of controversial modern art. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. Just stared and then moved on like she'd cataloged something deeply offensive. I chuckled to myself. If this mailbox was the hill she wanted to die on, I was going to make sure it wasn't a quick fall. On day 2, I came home from the hardware store to find her parked across the street. Her car was angled slightly toward my driveway, like she was trying to get the perfect frame. I took my time unloading a few small items from the trunk, just to make sure she saw I was in no rush. As I reached the porch, she rolled down her window and called out, "You do know your time is almost up, right?" I smiled politely. "Oh, for what?" "For the violation. The mailbox. Tomorrow's the deadline. Don't say I didn't warn you." "Right," I said with a nod. "Thanks for the reminder." She raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting me to be so calm. She was looking for panic, maybe a little nervousness, some crack in the facade that said I was getting ready to cave. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I turned and went inside, already thinking about how this was going to play out. That evening, I sat down at my laptop and drafted an email to the HOA president.
His name was Richard, and from our previous correspondence, he'd always struck me as fair, if a little too diplomatic. I attached a scanned copy of the original approval letter for the mailbox, complete with all the dates, signatures, and
photos. I also included a timeline of Karen's behavior, her unannounced visit, her threats, and now her apparent surveillance of my property. Just for good measure, I included the specific section of the HOA guidelines that confirmed individual mailbox designs could be approved by the board on a case-by-case basis, which mine had been. I didn't want to sound like I was overreacting, so I kept the tone polite but firm. I explained that I was new to the community, eager to comply with the rules, but also unwilling to be harassed over something that had already been settled in writing. I ended with a simple request. Please, confirm in writing that this matter is resolved so I can enjoy my home without further interruptions. I hit send just before bed. The reply came the next morning. Richard's email was concise, and it started with the words I'd hoped for. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. You are absolutely correct." He went on to apologize for the inconvenience and confirmed that the mailbox had been fully approved before installation. He also mentioned he would speak with Karen personally to ensure there are no further misunderstandings. I imagined that conversation would be a real treat, but the story didn't end there. True to her word, Karen returned on the third day. This time, she didn't knock. She hand-delivered an envelope marked with an aggressively bold notice of violation stamp in red ink. She left it tucked into my front door and took a photo of it there, presumably to prove she'd served me properly. I watched the whole thing through the peephole. She didn't even look around to see if I was home, just strutted back down the steps like a sheriff delivering an eviction order. I waited until she got halfway down the driveway before I opened the door and called out, "Karen, morning!" She stopped, turned, and offered a tight smile. "You've got your official notice. The board will be following up." "I appreciate that," I said, holding up the envelope. "Though you might want to talk to Richard before you file anything else. He's already cleared everything up." Her smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "I mean the HOA president confirmed the mailbox was approved. In writing. He's speaking to you about it directly, actually. Might want to check your email." I saw her jaw tighten. Her clipboard shifted slightly in her grip. "Well, we'll see what the board says." "Sure," I said with a shrug. "But you might want to hold off on making threats until you've read your own HOA's approvals. Wouldn't want to embarrass yourself." She didn't reply. She turned on her heel and marched off again, faster this time. That night, I got a follow-up email from Richard. He thanked me for my patience and let me know that Karen had been informed of the situation and that there should be no further issue. That's how you know someone got chewed out, when official language is full of vague diplomacy. Still, Karen wasn't done yet. In the next few days, she tried new tactics. She flagged my porch light as too bright for the neighborhood aesthetic. She claimed my garden hose wasn't the right color. She sent a message through the neighborhood app asking if anyone else had concerns about new residents ignoring long-standing community traditions. It was clear she was trying to stir up support for her crusade, but the neighborhood didn't seem interested in joining the drama. In fact, I received a couple of private messages from neighbors I hadn't even met yet saying things like, "Don't mind Karen. She's always like this." One even said, "Welcome to the block. Your mailbox looks great." That simple message made me laugh. Because while Karen thought she was enforcing rules and setting the tone, all she was really doing was alienating herself. And all over a mailbox. But she wasn't backing down yet. And neither was I. Saturday morning arrived quietly, with a light breeze rustling the trees and the kind of early sunshine that made the whole street look like a postcard. I was sipping coffee on my porch when I saw the HOA president's car pull up. Richard stepped out slowly, almost cautiously, wearing khakis and a polo that looked more like weekend golf wear than official business attire. He didn't bring a clipboard, which I took as a good sign. He approached the steps with a sheepish look, waving before he even reached the door. I stood up to meet him. "Morning," he said. "Mind if I have a word?" "Not at all." "Want a cup of coffee?" I offered, gesturing toward the extra mug on the porch railing. He gave a polite chuckle but declined. "Thanks, but I won't be long." I could already tell by his body language that he didn't want to be here. His shoulders were tense, his tone overly apologetic. This wasn't the visit of someone coming to enforce a rule. It was the visit of someone cleaning up someone else's mess. "I looked into everything," he began. "You were completely right. That mailbox was approved, and we had the documentation on file. I don't know why Karen didn't check before raising the issue. I spoke with her yesterday, and I made it clear the matter is closed." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Appreciate you confirming that." "I'm really sorry about the hassle," he added. "You're new here, and this isn't exactly the welcome we want people to get." "It's not a problem," I said, though of course it was. But there was no point in making Richard feel worse. He wasn't the one who showed up with threats and ultimatums. He was just the guy forced to babysit the situation after it escalated. He looked out at the mailbox briefly. Honestly, it looks great. I don't see what the issue was. I smiled. Appreciate that. He stayed for a few more minutes, mostly small talk about the neighborhood, the upcoming HOA meeting, the local farmers market. Then he thanked me for my patience, shook my hand, and headed back to his car. As he pulled away, I saw a curtain shift across the street, Karen's window. She'd been watching. Of course she had. I figured that would be the end of it. Most people, when presented with undeniable evidence and a firm word from someone in authority, would back off. But Karen? She wasn't most people. Instead of letting it go, she shifted tactics. Over the next week, I noticed little things. A pamphlet slid under my door about proper trash can placement. A sticky note left on my side gate reminding me to trim my hedges, even though they weren't even close to overgrown. A complaint posted on the neighborhood app about decorative lighting that could disturb nearby residents' sleep, suspiciously timed the day after I installed solar path lights around my garden. She was testing the waters, looking for any crack in the armor she could exploit. It wasn't about the mailbox anymore. It was about control. She'd made me a target, and backing down now would only prove she could bully me into submission, one nuisance at a time. That's when I decided to stop playing defense. I started documenting everything, every note, every comment, every attempt at passive-aggressive intimidation. I took photos. I logged dates and times. I even installed a front door camera that picked up audio. If she was going to try to build a case against me, I'd be ready to present one of my own. Only mine wouldn't be based on aesthetic grievances. It would be rooted in harassment. But the final straw came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was out, watering my plants when I saw Karen approaching with 2 other board members in tow. One of them I recognized from the community app as Joe. He seemed reasonable. The other was a woman named Lynette, who looked like she was just there for the drama. Karen marched up like she was leading an army. "We're here to do a compliance review," she announced, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I put down the hose. "Excuse me." "It's within the board's rights," she said. "We received several complaints about various aspects of your property, lighting, noise, even your wind chimes." I looked at Joe. He looked mildly embarrassed. Lynette was already scanning my yard like she was evaluating a crime scene. "Is this an official inspection?" I asked. Karen smirked. "It can be. You're not the only one who knows the rules." I crossed my arms. "Then I assume you brought the necessary documentation? Written notice? A checklist? Any form of identification that shows this is sanctioned?" She faltered, just slightly, and Joe cleared his throat. "Actually, we should have sent a notice before coming. I suggested we wait until—" "It's fine," Karen cut in. "We're here now." "No," I said firmly. "You're not. Not without proper notice. You can leave, or I'll consider this trespassing." Karen's face turned crimson, but Joe gently touched her elbow. "Let's go, Karen. We'll reschedule this properly." She tried to argue, but he wasn't having it. After a tense moment, they turned and left, Karen hissing something under her breath that I couldn't quite catch. That night, I decided I was done playing polite. I called a friend who worked in real estate law and explained everything. He agreed. It was textbook harassment and wrote up a cease and desist letter the next day. It was short, direct, and legal dynamite. It cited multiple counts of targeted behavior, abuse of HOA authority, and outlined the steps we would take if it continued, starting with a formal complaint to the management company and ending with a civil lawsuit if necessary.
I printed 4 copies, one for Karen, one for Richard, one for the HOA's property management, and one for me. I delivered it the next morning, taping Karen's copy to her door with a discreet but unmissable envelope. I didn't hear from her.
That day. Or the next. But by the weekend, a real estate sign had sprouted in her front yard. It was sudden. too sudden to be unrelated. Rumors started circulating on the neighborhood app. Something about a change of pace and family. Obligations in another state. No one believed it. Karen, the self-appointed guardian of Mailbox standards, was packing up, and just like that, the storm passed. Karen was gone by the end of the month. One morning I walked outside and saw the moving truck idling in her driveway, its ramp stretching down the front steps like a tongue swallowing up her precious furniture. She wasn't out there supervising the crew like I expected. No clipboard, no barking orders. Just a few movers quietly going about their job, boxing up a life that had spent more time policing others than living. Neighbors passed by slowly, each throwing glances, whispers, maybe even a little relief. For all her talk about community, Karen had built walls taller than any fence on the block. People tolerated her because they had to, not because they wanted to. And now, the street felt lighter, like it had collectively exhaled after holding its breath too long. I stayed on, my porch with a cup of coffee in hand, watching the spectacle from a distance. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I didn't say a word to her. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't need to. The situation had played itself out perfectly, without me ever raising my voice or losing my cool. She had come, in swinging, determined to make an example out of me. But in the end, she'd only proved her own irrelevance. A few hours later, the truck pulled away, and her house stood empty. Just like that, Karen was a memory, a cautionary tale told between hedges and driveway greetings. But the story doesn't end with her leaving. The fallout lingered like a faint echo, not quite disruptive, but loud enough to make people reassess things. For one, the HOA board shifted almost immediately. Richard called a community meeting just a week after Karen's departure. His invitation didn't mention her by name, but the tone made it clear. They were trying to rebuild trust. When I arrived at the community center, the room was fuller than usual, with more people showing up than Richard had probably anticipated. He stood at the front, hands loosely folded in front of him. Behind him was a whiteboard with neatly written bullet points, goals, updates, ideas. Not a single line about mailboxes or wind chimes. "We've had some recent changes," he began, "and I think it's a good opportunity to reframe how we serve this community." It was subtle, but the room nodded in agreement. He opened the floor for feedback. People spoke up about petty rule enforcement, the need for clearer communication, and the idea of rotating board positions more frequently. Several mentioned feeling intimidated in the past, afraid to decorate their lawns, afraid to paint their doors a slightly different shade, afraid to speak up. One woman in the back, who introduced herself as Lisa, said something that stuck with me. "The rules should make life easier, not harder. If we're spending more time arguing over garden gnomes than helping each other, we've missed the point." The room broke into soft applause. A few people looked at me and smiled. I just nodded. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it brief. "Moved here thinking it would be a fresh start," I said, "and for a moment I thought I'd made a mistake. But this place, this neighborhood, it's not defined by one person or one set of outdated rules. It's defined by the people who live here, and I'm glad I stayed." After the meeting, people came up to introduce themselves, some for the first time. A few apologized for not stepping in earlier when Karen went on her crusade. Others shared their own run-ins with her. One man, George, told me she once tried to fine him for using a non-regulation doormat. It just said "welcome." He laughed. Apparently that was too radical. That week, something changed on the street. People became friendlier. Invitations to backyard barbecues appeared in mailboxes. One neighbor, a retired teacher named Elaine, brought over homemade muffins and told me about the time Karen called animal control because her cat walked on someone's lawn. She was obsessed, Elaine whispered like she was sharing a state secret. Absolutely obsessed. And yet, in all this movement and healing, I never once heard anyone say they missed her. Spring melted into summer. The trees got greener, the evenings longer. My mailbox still stood proudly at the edge of my yard, clean, sturdy, unbothered. Occasionally, I'd catch someone admiring it as they passed by. More than once, someone asked where I got it and whether the HOA would approve one like it. I always said the same thing. Check with the board, but I've got the paperwork if you need it. One afternoon, I noticed a new couple moving into Karen's old house. A young pair, early 30s maybe, with a golden retriever and a toddler bouncing on a hip. They waved as I passed by, and I waved back. Later that week, they came over with a plate of cookies and introductions. We talked for an hour on the porch. I didn't mention the house's former occupant. I figured they'd find out eventually, either through whispers or stories. But for now, I wanted them to feel welcome, truly welcome. Not inspected, not judged, not warned, just welcomed. As they were leaving, the husband gestured to my mailbox. "That's a nice one," he said. "Thinking of replacing ours. Hope." "The HOA doesn't have a fit about it." I smiled and took a deep breath of the warm air. You'd be surprised how much can change with the right people in charge. And that was the truth. What started as a petty battle over a mailbox had become something far bigger, a shift in culture, in tone, in how people treated each other. Karen thought she had power because she had rules, but real power came from people standing up, pushing back, and refusing to be bullied. In the end, the mailbox stayed exactly where it was, and I finally felt at home.